More than 9 decades of serving the nation. Central Board of Irrigation and Power.
I am Surajit from CSC Limited. CSC is the power utility in Calcutta and its suburbs. It has 567 square kilometer of working area of operating zone. Myself, along with Ms. Munish, in this program, today's program, our basic responsibility is to ensure safety and security of our workmen in particulars and our consumers in general, and also to ensure risk and disaster resilience of our utilities, of our installations at generating stations, distribution stations and substations. So we are here in the training program to grasp much from your own experience and what the best in practice in our in India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your introduction. Anyone from the team present here in the classroom?
Myself, Sabuni Das from WBAC TCL. You know, TCL is a big transmission utility, and I think last consecutive 5 years they have secured the top position for the power utility, best utility company. And now we are doing coming from Kolkata and doing for this training.
Thank you.
I am Vihan Sarkar from WBAC TCL. Ma'am has already started our WBAC TCL. Now I am looking after the job of project. Previously I was engaged in various jobs like maintenance and construction of various projects, etc. Okay, thank you. Please continue.
Good morning. Myself Mangesh sir. I am from Mahajanko, Koina Generating Station Complex, Popri. I am working as a safety officer over there, and we are here to get knowledge from your vast experience. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Irrigation from Marg. I am working as assistant engineer, civil.
Good morning, sir. Myself Jagannath Yadav from KGST Populi, working as a junior fire officer from last 10 years.
Okay, I want one more introduction. What all you covered yesterday as part of disaster management session? You were there in yesterday's session also?
Disaster Management Act and various committees constituted for disaster management, right from national level to local level.
Right. So it was about the legislative framework related to disaster management you all have covered. Anything other than this disaster management framework and the institutes which are relevant for the disaster management perspective?
We had a discussion related to the emergency mitigation plans and the problems faced by transmission and distribution links during disaster.
Right. So we will carry forward yesterday's session of disaster management, and we will try to relate with your operations, because it is very important to relate whatever operational activities we are doing in day-to-day routine and how we need to prepare ourselves for any disaster. So to understand the relation between current operations and our preparedness level, we need to understand the logic of a disaster management cycle. I'm sure some of the fundamentals topics about disaster management must have been covered yesterday. Like there is very famous disaster management cycle. Okay, so I was asking about the disaster management cycle. What is that? We will start with some of the fundamental. It could be refreshment of yesterday's session, but we will build upon the topics which have been assigned to me for today. Okay. So what is disaster management cycle? I'm skipping the introduction of disaster management part because I'm sure you must have covered it yesterday in detail. So I'm just skipping those things. You must be aware of what is disaster by now. It is something which requires immediate attention. I'm just skipping these parts. So let's continue our discussion with disaster management cycle. So till then you can also go through the very famous disaster management definition, which is very comprehensive one.
Yes, sir. It has 4 phases. Immediate after disaster, it is response, then recovery, then in the peacetime activities are disaster risk reduction, and then preparedness.
Correct. And what comes the first? What is the first step in disaster management cycle?
Response, sir.
Response will not be the first step because it is a post-disaster phase.
Yes, post-disaster.
Pre-disaster phase, which is peacetime phase, which you
Yes,
mentioned
that
in
is
your
actually preparedness and mitigation.
yes.
Planning.
Yeah, planning. We can be more specific. What do we need to do as part of planning?
Planning and preparedness.
Yes, mitigation. Prevention mitigation is always the first step to manage any kind of disaster. And what does it mean? What is prevention and mitigation? Is there any difference between these two? How we can do mitigation for any specific disaster? What is mitigation? Yes.
Steps to be taken before occurrence.
You can use the mic so that they can also hear what we are discussing. So this mic will also go to. Yes, sir. This audio is connected with that. Yes.
Mitigations are the steps to be taken before occurrence of the disaster.
Right. So can you give some example? What is mitigation as part of disaster management? These are something very fundamental, but we need to be very clear before we move ahead with the topics like risk management in disaster. This is very heavy topic. We will discuss about that also. But we should know the basic definitions and all that. So give some example of mitigation.
So
Related
mitigation,
to disaster management. Yes.
it's actually reducing the risk as far as possible. So we can take the example, suppose there is an early warning of cyclone in the coastal area, then vacating the people of coastal area and keeping them in a safe house, that is one of the example of mitigation, so that we can reduce the risk of manpower loss of life and other human sufferings.
Okay. So taking some action which can minimize the impact of risk.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So one is reduction of risk and second part is minimizing the impact of a risk. So now I'm going further down. What is risk related to disaster management?
Loss of property and casualties.
Yes, that is a risk. Non-proper execution of. Okay. So this can lead to a risk. This is not a risk. This situation can lead to a risk. Risk is something which indicates some consequences. Okay. So if I relate this risk with safety, there will be some difference between safety related risk and disaster related risk. Okay. So if I relate it with the risk related to safety, I am sure most of you are also from safety division. It is related to the consequence and likelihood. Possibility of a consequence is a risk. And the same way in disaster, possibility of a consequence in terms of disaster impact. For example, there can be natural ones and the man-made also. And you must be aware, this is very basic thing. Natural, we don't have any control. It will not give us any chance to do something or some preparation. So we always need to have the preparation in advance. Okay. So now my discussion is around the mitigation. So in disaster management cycle, it is always focused on the prevention and mitigation part. Some disasters we cannot prevent because these are having the natural causes. But in some man-made situations, we can prevent converting emergency into disaster. So to understand this thing, what I'm saying, you need to understand what is emergency and what is disaster. There is a difference of scale between emergency and disaster. Can you give some example? What is emergency and what is disaster?
In the capacity of the authority to recover, but disaster is out of the
Yes.
man-made possibility to recover.
Correct. So disaster is something which has become now out of management situation, like we are not able to manage with our existing resources. So if something can be managed with existing resources, then it will not be a disaster. It will be a manageable situation. It will be an emergency situation. So always emergency is like a warning for you. If not attended well, it will be converted into a disaster. Now you relate this particular situation with your operations. What kind of emergency can come to your operations? I'm trying to build the first and very important topic of disaster management cycle. And therein we will be focusing on the preparation part. But before we go to the preparation, we need to understand the pre-disaster phase. Because nowadays, the focus of disaster management has been shifted to the pre-disaster phase. It is not always when disaster will come and then only we will take some actions. Our actions should be more in pre-disaster phase, because that is the right time to build the resilience, to prepare an organization to face those disasters. Okay, so there are so many examples of prevention and mitigations. We will discuss on that. But relate some mitigation measures, some more mitigation measures with your operational activities. Like there is a possibility of XYZ emergency in your operations, and what mitigation action you have taken up to reduce the impact of that disaster. Give me some example related to that. Just think in this direction, because ultimately all these 2 days learning you need to implement with your operational activities, and that is the whole objective of this 2 days workshop. Try to relate it. Yeah, first you can tell me the type of possible emergency situation, and to manage that emergency situation, what mitigation actions you have taken up.
Sir, may I?
Sir is saying something, you can share, and then we will be taking input from you also.
Okay, sir.
In substation.
Fire hazard in substation, yes. Okay, so what's your name, sir? Okay, sir has taken one possible emergency situation, which is a fire in substation area. Okay, to manage this emergency, what mitigation actions has been taken up? We will just list out some example of those mitigation measures. Yes.
On that way, routine checking of transformer wire.
Routine checking of
Transformer wire.
Transformer wire. Okay. So how this will reduce the fire related emergency impact?
Because transformer contains transformer wire.
Transformer
Yes.
oil you are saying. Okay.
Transformer wire. If you reduce the, if you upgrade the value of transformer result of transformer wire, then fire result may be prevented somehow. Because fire occurs only burning of due to burning of transformer wire.
Yes, yes. So in transformer fire, the only fuel element which is available for creating a major fire, including explosion in transformer, is transformer oil, which is a flammable component. So if there is some maintenance issue in transformer, then that can trigger the heating, which is beyond its normal temperature conditions. Although there are a lot of engineering controls, a lot of relays are installed in transformers, but still, despite those relays and engineering control, like Gurgaon's relay is one example. Okay, there are other relay systems, relay controls are available in transformer that up to this temperature nothing will happen. Beyond this temperature, there will be a power breakdown. Okay, but if that controls fails, then transformer oil will trigger the large size of fire in transformer. And it is also very important to maintain the transformer to not to trigger that high temperature that can trigger the large fire. So maintenance of transformer is one mitigation example. There will be set frequency. What is that kind of maintenance? The basic maintenance steps could be your dehydration, which is very common. There can be other testing methods in that. Filtration, yes.
Oil testing.
Resolved gas analysis of transformer oil. Okay. So these are some examples which will reduce the possibility of fire emergency situation, which can convert into disaster if not attended well. This is one example. Okay. Second example could be anyone else specifically focusing on fire, because sir has taken fire emergency as the possible emergency situation in the transformer. What other mitigation measures are possible in transformer? Just try to think specifically on fire safety in transformer. So Madhuri ma'am, you were sharing some example.
Yes, sir. My
Your example is related to transformer oil or something else?
No, it's a bit different, sir. Rather, we are in Kolkata.
Okay.
Just a couple of weeks back, we have a huge demand of load. Peak demand, huge demand of load. Since we were reeling under heat wave, sir. Heat wave in Kolkata, actually it was unprecedented before. But this year we are facing heat wave. Because in Kolkata, since we are very close to Kolkata, like Ganges and coastal area, we didn't feel such heat wave before. But it happened this year, and for that we have a huge demand of load, because in fact our peak demand has touched 2,606 megawatt almost, and it was on 16 June, and it comprises of both sanctioned load and unsanctioned load. Because we have an average, definitely we have an average peak demand, normal, which is normal in summer time. But the difference of peak demand this year, actually we have calculated that it is almost to the tune of 2.5 lakh AC machines, because people of Kolkata, they are also not used to it, and they are using so much of ACs in their household. So this was the problem. So supplying to this great demand is a problem for us. In fact, there was it was an emergency, and at the same time there was a disaster like grid failure, because it is a very challenging situation for us.
Possible disaster situation which you are taking up.
Grid failure, exactly so. So extreme overloading conditions, somehow we maintained this time, but we have learned two things this time. This is two-pronged approach we have taken. Mainly, number one is to strengthening our network, especially in those pockets where we have found extreme overloading. And number two, awareing consumer, make the consumers aware that they have to intimate us, because this summer we have got only AC application for 50,000, 50 to the tune of 50,000. But actually the demand shows that it is more than 2.5 lakh. So awareness, building awareness to the consumers, and so we are going through press notifications and all those things. So this is the emergency situation, and which could lead a disaster situation like grid failure. Somehow this time the monsoon has come, so we have got rid of it. So this is the situation.
Okay, so if you have taken up grid failure as possible emergency situation, what kind of mitigative actions you have taken up to reduce the impact of this disaster?
Yes, sir. Number one,
So
I have
mitigation is always preventive. What
Yes,
preventive
preventive.
steps you have
Yes.
taken up? Yeah.
Yes, sir. We are in the phase of strengthening our distribution network, especially in those
Okay.
pockets where
So
there
strengthening
is
of
huge
distribution network is one example of mitigation measure. How to do that? Just explain a little bit so that we can relate that these are the steps. We will also come back to the transformer example, but before
Yes.
that you can share how to strengthen the distribution network.
That is also related to transformer because we call them sources because we have to install distribution transformers and we
Okay,
have to
distribution
install
transformer
distribution
installation is
stations
one
as well.
example of mitigation measure to reduce the impact of grid failure. Okay, or to reduce the chances of having grid failure. So, am I able to relate the mitigation with the possible disaster or emergency situation? Are you able to relate these examples? See, we usually do all these things, but now what we are doing, we are relating these with the terms of disaster management. Okay, so any other example other than installation of distribution transformers to strengthening the distribution network? Any other example?
Substation battery maintenance.
Which one?
Substation battery maintenance.
Transmission?
Substation battery.
Substation
That is the heart of the substation.
Okay, okay.
Actually, if the battery is not healthy, relay will not operate.
Okay. If the battery is not healthy, then what will happen?
Relay
Relay.
will not operate, and breaker and other protective equipment will not operate.
Okay, okay. So now you are relating some of the engineering controls which are installed, which can lead to grid failure. So these may be the micro level technical issues which can impact the possibility of grid failure. So this is very micro level example you have given. Yes.
So we can effectively use distribution management system of like SCADA. Right?
Okay. Automation. Okay, I'm sure in almost all the substation nowadays, SCADA or some other systems are installed to have this automation in place.
But they should also upgrade to advanced.
What are those examples?
Like in Tata Power, TDM, yeah.
Mhm.
North Delhi, they have installed ADMS.
ADMS.
Yeah.
Okay. Advanced distribution management system. So we are coming up with very new example, which is also good. Addition of some technology, upgradation of technology to reduce the impact of disaster. That is another mitigation example. This is interesting. ADMS, Advanced Distribution Management System, is also an example of adding or upgrading the existing technology to reduce any potential emergency situation. And now, yeah.
Forecasting is one of the example.
Forecasting?
Load forecasting.
Load forecasting, okay. Yes, like Madhuri ji is also explaining that there was certain demand, but this was not forecasted correctly. So actual was more than whatever they were expecting.
We are able to proper.
So do we have any mechanism to have the accurate forecasting to be done? Anything nowadays? Artificial intelligence and lot of such things are coming up.
So we can't have an accurate measure, but we can have a precise.
Near to accuracy.
We can reduce the impact.
How to do that?
The help of historical data.
Historical data basis.
Nowadays smart meters are being installed, so
Yes.
it can hold the data. We can check the seasonal analysis, daily analysis of the load, so we can forecast the schedule of.
Smart meter installation is also very big national level project. I was also part of this smart meter installation. I'm sure. I think some company in Delhi Smart is doing that, and it has very high capability to capture all the historical data, which is important for such forecasting. this. Okay. So now I'll come back to the transformer example. So I am sure you must be able to relate these examples with the disaster management cycle. We are still at the first step of disaster management cycle, which is a preventive and mitigation. Preventive mitigation is always the first step to manage any disaster. So I'll take the example of transformer, which was discussed by sir. So there is a system in transformer, and that too high capacity transformer. I'll ask this question: what is the level of net capacity where this installation of NIMPS? Have you heard about NIMPS?
Yes.
Nitrogen injection based fire protection system, NIMPS. What is the capacity of transformer beyond which it is mandatory to install?
More than 50 MVA. We install it in 80 MVA transformers.
10 MVA is the capacity. More than 10 MVA, it is mandatory to install.
More than 10 MVA.
10 MVA oil capacity is 2,000 liters.
Oil capacity beyond 2000 liter is also it is required to have. So see, it is not mandatory always to have.
Yesterday we were told that
also installed emulsifier based fire protection system, high velocity jet spray that can also be installed.
50 MVA.
But nowadays, with the latest regulations of Central Electricity Authority, you must be aware of 2023 regulations has already come up. There is a latest, I think about 1 week or 10 days back, this Central Electricity Authority 2023 regulations has come up. It is about just 5-10 days back only. Okay. So earlier it was like a kind of suggestion, but now they are mandating it. So it is 10 MVA and beyond. An IPS or emulsifier based system is required to be installed, which is also a kind of mitigation measure related to fire emergency in the substation area, specifically in the transformer area. That is one example. Any other example you would like to give related to prevention mitigation? I'm sure with these examples you will be clear what is our first step in disaster management cycle. Our first step is to identify the possible emergency situation and take the mitigation measure before even we think of this disaster situation, before even this disaster onset is coming up. Okay.
One more step we can take that, like the guard, where there's a guard who's guarding the substation. So sometimes they do not properly guard. They just roam around once in a day and just sit down. So we can have some access cards. You can give access cards to them, and
Yes.
there should be bifurcations in the substation, so that whenever he do the circling of the station, so he will go and access that. And we should also have the steps that the time to move from one point to another.
Okay.
He should not do like that. He will run and access all the barricades, and so we should have that time also calculated. That from one point to another point, this much time is needed to cover by normally walking and inspecting. So that kind of access card system should be.
So this is more of, I think, safety related initiative, because restriction in these areas are very important to manage the safety aspects.
Safety aspects also, and sometimes it is not proper inspection, like something is leaking or some problem is there, some is sparking. No one is there to see, because now we are moving towards automated substations. Regular inspecting, and
Yes.
so like we are aware what is happening. We are not leaving it to SCADA only.
So it is giving additional layer of manning the substation area and give proper guarding or restricted entry with some access control system. Okay. So this is additional layer, I can say, but it will improve the safety aspect of the area. But I'm not able to relate how this will reduce the impact of a disaster or possibility of disaster. But yes, see, always safety and disaster aspects are related to each other. So starting point for any emergency or disaster situation is also from a safety lapse. Okay. There are a lot of cases of fire in substation area, and all of these fires are because of some ignorance of those safety features which should have been there. And that is how evolution of various safety requirements and engineering controls are available with all of us, which Central Electricity Authority always do take the responsibility of launching it into the latest version. So up till now, up till 2023, there were no specific requirements related to the power plants which are based on solar and wind. But nowadays there has been specific chapters in 2023 version, and this is how I'm giving you example of evolution of our legislative infrastructure. We also keep on evolve, and I will relate this evolution with disaster management cycle, and I'll ask some questions related to that from you. So now we have discussed the man-made situations, that is fire and other technical issues, whether it is grid failure or any other thing. Can you relate this mitigation measures with any of the natural disaster situation or natural emergency? You were very correctly able to relate mitigation with the man-made disaster situation or emergency situation, but how natural disaster will also have some mitigation actions. Think of something which is beyond our control and what kind of mitigation measures we have taken up. So all of these examples which we have discussed are man-made. Nature is not playing any part in it.
So like in case of drought.
In case of drought, okay.
The earthing will be affected of the substation. So we can use their chemical earthing like bentonite and all.
Okay.
That proper conductivity of the earthing rod is maintained. Otherwise, in case of fault or something, abnormal conditions, there will be.
So again, I will say that this is not going to directly impact or reduce the impact of a disaster, but this is again a kind of safety initiative. But there can be more related example of mitigation measure related to natural emergency or disaster. Think of what natural disaster can impact your operations.
Like in case of cyclone, the
Cyclone is good example.
Distribution lines can be snapped.
Yes,
many lines.
Correct. So how to protect the distribution lines from the impact of a cyclone? That will become mitigation measures. So do we have any specific protections to these lines to prevent the impact of a cyclone?
Underground cabling system.
Underground cabling system, yes. In some of these areas, underground cabling systems work. And this also works. With this example, I'm getting as an environmental professional. I am also an environmental professional. In some of the wind power projects where there are some specific species of a bird, they also suggest that now overhead lines are not recommended because of some unique species of birds.
Area, that Great Indian Bastard.
Yes,
that are all.
So there also it is suggested to have underground cabling system. So I was able to relate that. Yes. Any other protection measures to prevent the impact of a cyclone? Anyone from the Microsoft team? There are a lot of participants in the team. Any example you would like to give?